歡迎收睇傳媒對焦。世界經濟論壇指出，氣候變化嘅衝擊成為短期同埋長期嘅最高風險之一。北極變暖亦都令到全球不斷出現極端嘅天氣。歐洲今年嘅冬天氣溫就創咗新高，好似夏天。研究發現，喺冬季湖面結冰嘅程度逐年下降，意味住氣候變化已經影響到本國北部社區嘅道路運輸同埋戶外活動。湖面結冰唔夠厚，造成遇溺嘅事故增加。咁冬季嘅氣溫變暖，對社區嘅安全威脅有幾嚴重呢？
北國嘅冬天原本應該係冰天雪地，唔同國家、唔同民族喺冰雪裡面熱鬧歡騰咁過年。到而家冰雪日子縮短咗，所帶嚟嘅隱憂絕對不能輕視。
Our data set from Japan actually starts from 1443. And so we can document how climate has changed before the Industrial Revolution and how human impacts have changed the climate through examining lake ice. And in Asia, one of the longest ice records that I work with is from Lake Suwa in Japan. And it's been maintained, and it still is, by 15 generations of Shinto priests. And they record that the date that the lake ice forms. And that's because it's very important to the Shinto religion. We also know in China that ice is very important. So the first fish that's caught in ice fishing is auspicious and very important to the community, as well as ice festivals. So some of the largest ice festivals that happen in the world happen in China. So ice really brings together communities in the winter, not only in Canada, but all around the world.
極北，尤其是係冰雪社區嘅內外運輸，好依賴冰路，至少1公尺厚。Sharma 教授嘅研究團隊發現，全球氣溫每上升攝氏1.5度，道路可通行嘅安全日數就會下降90%；上升2度，安全度就下降9成半；上升3度就下降9成9。同樣，若果要靠冰雪嚟進行戶外娛樂活動，每上升1.5度，安全可以遊玩嘅日子就減少13日，2度就減少17日，3度就減少24日。因為要承受一個人嘅重量，冰雪起碼要有10厘米厚度。
Climate change is actually affecting northern regions a lot more, where temperatures are warming a lot faster than in southern regions. So they're experiencing the impacts of climate change much more drastically. So we did this global study looking at how many people fall through the ice and drown. And we found that in northern Canada, they had the highest drowning rates per capita because there's a strong reliance on ice. You need people travel by snowmobiles or on snow trails. So ice fishing and hunting is a very important part of their culture, and it's contributing to more fatalities, unfortunately.
達沃斯論壇係一個年度世界經濟論壇，近50年嚟，每年1月份，世界領袖、大企業主管同唔少嘅名流明星會齊集喺瑞士一個小鎮達沃斯，出席呢個經濟論壇，參加唔同嘅會議，討論唔同嘅議題，試圖改善世界現狀。約克大學嘅 Sharma 教授亦做咗一項研究，同氣候變化有密切關係。
So what we're finding is that there's less ice in the winter across the northern hemisphere. So we have later ice on dates, earlier ice off, shorter ice duration, and even declining ice thickness. And the reason why this is important, it's because ice is really important to maintain water quality, freshwater availability, and freshwater quality. So if you have less ice, you can think of ice as like a lid on a lake in winter. If you lift that lid early, what you end up having is more evaporation. So more of our fresh water, we have less of it because it's evaporating. The other thing that happens is that when you lift that lid early, the water temperatures warm earlier, they warm warmer, you have more algal production in the lakes, and that can sometimes lead to poor water quality and algal blooms. So ice sort of maintains what's happening in lakes, not only in the winter, but through the whole year. When you have ice, it sort of slows down the lake ecosystem processes. So it slows down life, it slows down what animals might, they need less energy, they need less food, and it acts like a reset button on a lake. We've noticed that there's less ice, and so there's less time for people to use the ice safely. And what we've seen is that ice fishing tournaments are increasingly canceled because the ice isn't thick enough for people to go ice fishing, ice skating competitions. So in Sweden, so actually in Europe, so this ice skating race started in the 1700s in the Netherlands. And because of climate change, it's increasingly moving to more northern countries. And so now this skating race is in Sweden, but in some winters it's too warm for the skating race to take place. So this project was a collaboration with researchers from Wales, from South Korea, and from China. And the reason that we all worked together for this project was because we all brought different skills and expertise to the project. And so, I work on the impacts of climate change on lakes by collecting large data sets. We had a collaborator who works with remote sensing and world data collected from satellites. Our collaborators are from Busan in South Korea and Beijing in China. And then our Chinese and South Korean collaborators have these amazing skills and access to supercomputers that can analyze large amounts of data. So in this project, we analyzed 38 billion data points for every grid cell on the planet from 1850 to 2100 under different climate change models. And without our collaborations in China and South Korea, this research would not have been possible.
同1971年第一次達沃斯論壇相比，而家達沃斯嘅雪量亦已經減少咗40%以上。今一屆論壇開幕前夕就發布咗2023年全球風險報告，鄭重指出氣候變化嘅衝擊係短期同長期嘅最高風險之一。
Lake ice is predominantly affected by warming climates. And so the only real solution to preserving lake ice cover is reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And that takes global cooperation and effort to come together to develop cleaner technologies, to implement policies that will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and that with those changes, we'll see actually extreme benefits to environment here in Canada, but everywhere.
報告將自然災害同極端天氣事件列為未來2年世界面臨嘅第2大風險，而喺未來10年嘅最大風險就係應對氣候變化不力。
What does it take for politicians here and in wealthier countries to care about people who going through the impacts of climate change already? So I think we need a little bit more empathy as well from our leaders to care about how other people are affected by our actions.
北極嘅變暖速度係全球平均速度嘅4倍，而北極變暖增加咗全球極端天氣事件發生嘅概率。
What happens in the Arctic or any place in the world, it's not contained to that region. It has these global impacts. So the melting glaciers, the melting sea ice, that all contributes to changing water levels in the sea, and changing atmospheric circulation patterns that affects climate here in Toronto, but also elsewhere. Climate change is a global phenomena, so it's not whatever happens in the north or whatever particular region you're in, it's not contained there.
2023年元旦前後，歐洲多國冬季氣温都創咗新高，多地氣温突破攝氏20度，好似夏天。而大西洋彼岸嘅美國就經歷咗極度寒潮，之後加州出現洪災，至少19人死亡。總統拜登宣布該州份進入緊急狀態。
The goal of this project has been achieved. That goal was to understand the impacts of climate change on safe ice thickness. But now we've recently received a grant from ArcticNet to actually expand our project to looking at lake ice, snow cover, and sea ice, and to see how climate change is affecting all three components and what that means for transportation to Arctic communities and remote communities. So what we're going to do is identify areas where, marine shipping is going to increase because of less sea ice and climate change, but the road infrastructure is going to be less stable and there's going to be a shorter road season. So how do remote communities get access to food, to fuel, to medicine in the winter months? And that's what we're hoping to study over the next 2 years.
更加令世人擔憂嘅係呢啲因素極有可能形成一股壓力，除咗衝擊住發達國家，對脆弱嘅發展中國家，更加會形成不可估計嘅傷害。受害嘅係世上絕大多數嘅人口同我哋嘅下一代。
We see young people every week protesting to save our planet and do something about climate change. And does anyone really care? Not really. Like, Canada's emissions are increasing so rapidly. Sometimes we might say that, climate change is happening, it's affecting people, but we don't really change our policies. We don't decrease our greenhouse gas emissions here. And I think the big problem is that the people who are going to be impacted by climate change are not necessarily the people who live in the rich countries. So it's people who live in Southeast Asia, people who live in Africa, and in South America. They're the ones who are already experiencing the negative impacts of climate change.
達沃斯論壇部分與會代表更加指出，要避免科學家所預言嘅最壞後果，相信最重要嘅就係錢。
But there's also motivation and the desire to bring in some change and to say that our planet is important to us, it's important to our future generations, it's important to our kids and our grandkids. And if we don't do something about it now and we don't have a shift in ideology and how much greenhouse gas emissions that we emit, our children and our grandchildren are not going to have a great future.
各位如果想重溫以上節目內容嘅話咧，可以去到本台嘅網站，點擊節目重溫裡面嘅傳媒對焦就可以啦。再會。